they would be somewhat elongated.
Bonjour et bienvenue à Quelque peu allongé. Je m'appelle Nicolas et alors je suis ici avec mon ami
Lachlan. Konnichiwa. Somewhat elongated. E yokoso. Watashi tachi wa Nicolas-san to Lachlan-san. Yoroshiku onegai shimasu.
Oh, arigato.
Yeah, boy.
So that was some French from me and some Japanese from Lockie. Today's episode is on language, and yeah, let me just begin by asking, where did your language learning journey begin?
Well, as an infant,
Yes.
I picked up some English. Yes. Obviously, we're talking second languages. Yeah.
That's a good point, actually.
That's a good question, man. I hadn't deeply thought about that. One of my earliest best friends when I was in like kindergarten year 1 was Vietnamese, actually, but not like we spoke any Vietnamese. Like he was Aussie, but his parents were Vietnamese. But I don't recall any of that, to be honest. For some reason, I was really interested in Japanese as a kid. I think because their culture's distinctly, especially their traditional culture, is distinctly different to what you have in Australia. So, and I also liked Dragon Ball Z and Pokemon. So I think all these things would have influenced me into like something's happening in that, and it's so different to where we are. So
okay, cool.
Yeah, I think Japanese was probably the first. I did it in primary school. Like year 6 onwards. Before that, I don't even remember if I did languages at school. But and to be honest, I didn't really try very hard at school. You know, like I just did it was a class I was doing, but I probably was very average at it. And then I did French for year 11 and 12 for IB, because you have to do a language if you do international baccalaureate.
Cool.
And to be honest, I did French because I thought it'd be easier to get a better mark in French because it was ab initio like beginners, as opposed to I think if I did Japanese, it would have been more advanced. Looking back, it would have been sweet. Each is good though. Like I'm glad I did French because now I have a pretty good understanding of French, and it's in a different language. But it's also much more similar to English than Japanese is. So, I don't regret it. But if I did Japanese in year 11 and 12, surely I'd be at a higher level than I am in Japanese now. So, yeah.
Oh, that's interesting, man.
Is that an insightful answer? I don't know.
It's just your history.
Yeah.
We'll go into it deeper.
Yeah.
No, that's interesting because I think I didn't think of like anime as being like, yeah, that was an early exposure to Japanese culture, but it is because, you know, Pokemon, Dragon Ball Z, I definitely watched all that stuff as well.
Yeah.
I guess you don't really get exposed to the language because it's all dubbed in English.
Yeah, no, you're right. It was all English, but I do think I might have had the thought of like for Pokemon, for example, it's so random. Like, I feel like every other Western media in that, it makes sense, you know, like this person's doing this thing, whatever. But like in Pokemon, the Pokemon themselves are completely made up creatures. They're stored in Pokeballs. Like, how do you get that concept?
Right.
It all makes sense when you watch it, but
yeah.
I remember being like, it was just so different. I feel like a lot of anime is like that. Like, I'm like, how did the guy come up with this?
Yeah.
Like, that is, as soon as you understand the laws of that world, that like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But to be creative enough to come up with it, something about that I thought was or like really cool. I really liked it. Like a lot of people like it, you know. And I think that must have something to do with the culture of where that person lives, you know.
Yeah.
In some way.
Right.
So yeah, and I like a lot of the Japanese aesthetics, you know, like ninjas are really cool. Yeah, and then learning more about it, there's like respect is pretty significant in Japan and like a lot of countries. I'd say it's more traditionally respectful than Australia, for example. Yeah, and so I don't know, a lot of these things I find I like. Yeah, maybe as a kid you don't realize, but maybe they spoke to my like deeper values, you know, and yeah, and learning the language is part of understanding it better. It's not all of it, but it contributes, I think, you know.
So the first exposure to a second language was Japanese then?
From memory, yep.
And that was in primary school?
Yeah, so definitely in year 6. Oh no, but before that, yeah. So I'm pretty sure I did it in because I moved schools in year 6, but I do remember now having done it with a different Japanese teacher. Maybe it would have been like, I don't actually know what year you start languages at schools typically, but may have been year 3 or 4, or even 2. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting, man.
But that would be so superficial at that point, I feel like, you know, because I feel like the kids don't really pay much attention, so it's a very limited amount of language they're learning, don't you think? I'm not familiar with like a year 3 curriculum.
Yes. Me neither, but you know, there's always this myth that it's like easier to learn a language as a child, so...
Yeah.
Yeah, so the advantage is maybe that you're more plastic, but the disadvantage is that you're not paying attention.
Yeah.
And also, you're not being immersed in the language. You know, you might get exposed to Japanese for like an hour a week or something.
Yeah. I was thinking about that recently, man, because I always like to not I like to try to challenge these beliefs that would be limiting to yourself. So if you think, only kids can get fluent in languages because they have this neuroplasticity, then you're less likely to try and become fluent in language, which I absolutely think is possible as an adult. And I was thinking for this thought about children learning faster, I wonder if it's actually just because I've been spending time with really young kids recently, and I can see obviously they're surrounded by English, so the only thing they have to remember is English. But whereas when you're an adult, you're studying that language, but then you got to go back to doing your taxes and like things that are important that you can't really afford to. Right. I'm gonna try and do it in Japanese. You know what I mean? Like I might make a big mistake.
Right.
Even when I was living in Japan, I wanted to flick my phone and computer over to Japanese, but I never did it because I was still doing business back in Australia, and I don't know, like. As an adult, you're like, I just want to get the business done efficiently and quickly and well, so I'll do it in English, you know? Whereas as a kid, you don't have to worry about that, so you could just be like... And even an adult, you could do that too. All Japanese, it's going to be painful for a while, but you're going to get through it. You're going to learn faster. So that was my thought on it, man. Whereas the kid can dedicate like 100% to that language. Right. As an adult... just because you have more responsibilities and things like that.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about, you know, let's say that an adult did have the amount of time that a younger person had. I think that part of it is like also once you've spoken a language for a while, you're like literally your mouth and your like throat, like there are muscles that are used for certain languages that just get stronger. So then there are sounds that are difficult to make once you've established kind of like your musculature in your mouth and throat. Yeah. And so you have to kind of relearn some things. Like I know that it took me quite a long time to get the French R. And then
let's hear a little bit, mate.
Look, what's a good word? Très.
Très. Yeah.
So we would say like tray.
Yeah.
Tray.
Yeah.
Très.
No, it's trays. So it's spelled because it's French uses English characters, I guess you call them.
I think it's the Roman alphabet.
Okay, yeah. So tre is TRES. It's how you write it. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is it an E acute?
I think it is. Yeah, it has an accent on it.
Okay, yeah. TRE acute S. Anyway, but yeah, as an English speaker learning French, at first you'll be cringy because you'll be saying trays.
Yeah.
So you even have to learn the subtleties of these.
Even bonjour, even that hasn't, and that's like maybe the first word you would learn.
Bonjour. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's like that's wrong.
Yeah.
It doesn't have the appropriate French accent. So then, that was a big thing that I focused on. So so there's that.
Yeah, that's true. So a lot of French is the
accent.
Yeah, you can remember the word, but you need to learn how to pronounce it still.
Oh, 100%. I actually think that accent is a big part of, maybe we can come back to this, but cool. I think accent's actually a big part of any language. Cool.
Because with Japanese, I just find it easy.
Well, that's because I think Japanese is like very, like the accent is not too, it's, I don't know how to describe it. I don't have the words to say, but it's very, you know.
Yeah. Well, the alphabet is like A, I, U, E, O.
Yeah.
Ka, ki, ku, ke, ko.
Yeah.
Ra, ri, ru, re, ro. Like that's how it's designed. So I feel like it is easier to pronounce in that way because
it's very staccato. Like you can get there.
But the thing is, I mean, there's small differences. But it's similar to what you're saying in French there, where it's not.
It's not really an R.
Yeah, it's not really an R. It's got like a little L in front of it.
Yeah.
And you've got to listen very closely to notice that.
Yeah.
But when you're an English person learning it, they'll just say ra, ri, ru, re, ro, because that's good enough for now.
Right.
Later on, we can get into.
That's right.
You know, and that's also why Japanese people learning English, I think they find saying L very difficult.
L and R. Yep.
Yeah, because they don't have. Yeah. To them, it's almost a different, similar thing. It's cool though. You can learn it. You just have to put that time in. Yeah.
Well, what I was going to say is that, so there are these ways to get into a language where you use your common anchors. As you said, you know what an R sounds like. So then, even though it's not an R, you use the R to get in.
Yeah.
Now, what I personally do is I avoid that at all costs, because what it means is that you get good at using the language incorrectly.
Yeah.
And so then you ingrain bad habits that you then have to remove. For me, it's like, I don't want to ingrain any bad habits. So just tell me what the thing sounds like, and I'll try and imitate that immediately.
So you'll feel like you're going slower at first.
Yeah.
Practicing that thing. But then.
Yes.
Yeah.
I avoid, I think that it's better in the long run.
Yeah.
I think that it's much easier to learn the thing the right way rather than to learn it the wrong way and then to come back and have to readjust. So for me, it's just because that's the way that I like to engage with languages. I really like the sound of a language. That's kind of what brings me in. That's why I learned French.
Cool.
So it just brings me in there. So sonically, I was like, I want to get a grasp on this language. So I began there, and I'm really happy that I did that because, things like the French R, it's like, it's difficult to unlearn using the wrong R. So
nice. I was also thinking, more recently I learned Korean, definitely not to the same level I've learned Japanese, but I was visiting Korea and I thought I'll learn at least this bunch of phrases and I'll learn how to read Hangul, and which is really easy to learn their characters system. It's as opposed to Japanese where there's almost infinite number of kanji. There's a very limited number of characters in the Korean alphabet, and then they kind of combine and it's really intelligently designed. Anyway, that was cool because that was easier, but the pronunciation, man, they have what to an English speaker, two letters that pretty much sound exactly the same, and even me listening over and over and over it was hard for me to pick up the difference. So in your case, I should have sat there and figured it out. And
it depends on because I think that there are ways to get in easily.
Yeah.
And so if you just want to get started really quickly, I think it's use as many anchors as you'd like to get in. This is why I think that actually the adult learner has advantages over the child learner, many advantages.
Yeah.
Think about a 2-year-old versus a 40-year-old or something. You could probably take that 40-year-old from nothing to a sentence in an hour.
Yeah.
But you couldn't take that 2-year-old from nothing to a sentence.
True.
So actually, you can get an adult, in my opinion, you can get an adult learner to a place much more quickly than you can get a younger learner. So I think that there's that. But then, as I said, because you build all this musculature on your mouth, I really think it's just that. Yeah, because you could like take a person that's and has an English background and just like drop them and have them be raised in Japan, and I'm sure they'll pick up all the mouth sounds and all that sort of stuff. They'll pick that up. I really think that it's like you get exposed to a bunch of sounds, and then you have to make those sounds, and then your musculature develops to make those sounds, and then also your brain is attuned to hearing certain sounds. So as you said with the Korean stuff, it's like there are subtle differences, but your brain's actually not. For instance, Chinese, it's like, tonal language. So you're out in English, it's not a tonal language. So we're not really predisposed to distinguishing between tones and having that actually be meaningful.
Isn't that cool?
Yeah, it's awesome.
So cool to think that.
I think it's awesome.
That is a new world.
It is. That's how I feel about it. Yeah. But so yeah, I think there are just differences between the younger learner and the adult learner, and there are different things to navigate.
The other benefit of the adult learner, they probably have more discipline, so they can probably sit down and study longer than a kid. One other thing I was thinking just then was, I also wonder if part of the something that adds difficulty for an adult learner is like the fear of looking silly, because when you try and do the accent of a different language, I mean, maybe to some extent you feel like, I'm forcing this, I'm being fake or something, Yeah. But you got to embrace it. Feel like, be ready to feel silly and try, because then you'll eventually. I find the same thing with doing impressions. I'm not really good at doing impressions. My brother's very good at them.
Oh, okay.
And I think it's because I'm like, I'm worried I'll sound silly and I won't quite get it right. But I feel like, no, if you instead just try it, the more you do it, the better you'll get, So, same thing for maybe the accent of.
I think that's such a meta principle. I actually think that embarrassment holds us back from much more than language learning. Yeah. Much more. Yeah. I'll tell you, I was actually thinking about this yesterday. I'll tell you something that I used to do that is quote unquote embarrassing, but I never felt embarrassed about it, was I would just talk to myself in French. Like I'd be on the bus, just talking. I'd be pretending to have a phone conversation, but there was nobody there.
Yeah, with your phone to your ear.
So afterwards, when I got AirPods, I'd put them in, so I wouldn't look crazy.
Yes.
But I don't really care about looking crazy. So then I was like, okay, like if there was a person who was embarrassed about this, then they would get so much less language learning done than I would.
Yeah.
So
that's also another part of it. When you're in that, and I want to go back to like soon to your journey, of course, but when you're in a different country, because I felt this in Japan, because I've lived in Japan for about 6 months. I feel like it's maybe at the start of when you get there, you're a bit shy. It's so stupid that I'm shy to speak to someone Japanese because I'm worried I'm going to make a mistake. Of course I'm going to make a mistake. So I just had to quickly accept. Yep. And when I mean a mistake, I mean like, especially with little like grammatical,
right.
Like, using the wrong connector word. So in English, it might be, instead of saying like, let's go to the park, let's go to park, let's go to park.
Right.
You know what I'm saying. I'm not saying it quite right, but who cares, So I had to do, I for a little bit I was a bit shy about or concerned about making a mistake, and then eventually I'm like, I know I'm going to make mistakes, embrace it. Again, that way you'll learn faster.
Right.
Find yourself a friend that will correct you when you make a mistake on things,
Right.
Yeah. It's the same embarrassment thing here.
I was laughing because when I went to India with my mate, I went with an Aussie mate, and all the people that would speak to us in broken English, obviously, which is fine. I mean, who cares? Like even without perfect grammar, you get your meaning across. But the reason I was laughing is because at one point my friend started speaking like that, and I remember we were in a hotel and there was a power outage actually, and then the lights came back on, and he was worried about, do we have everything that we need? So he wanted to ask me if we had towels, and he goes, do we have towel? And I go, did you just say, do we have towel?
And he wasn't joking.
He wasn't joking. Yeah. He didn't realize that, because your brain is just taking in all this different English.
Yeah.
That he just started speaking like that. Okay, mate, do we have towel?
Yes. That's so funny, man. I actually felt like that as well. Post learning like a lot more Japanese, I can sometimes be lazy with English where I'm like,
that's right.
That's enough. You know what I'm trying to say. I don't need to.
That's right.
And making notes to myself. Previously, I would have like had good grammar.
That's right.
Now I'm a bit less. You know, I don't know if that's from learning Japanese or just changing. You know, yeah.
It's funny how that happens, hey? Like, and it just goes to show. We'll come back to this later, but just goes to show that language is a tool, right? So that, you know, and as I spoke about in previous podcasts, I actually don't think that grammar is as important as we make it out to be, you know.
Yeah.
You can break grammatical rules and still get your meaning across.
That's a good point, man.
And grammar is retrospective in the sense that, you know, languages always evolve organically and then we retrospectively impose grammar on them. So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, just to think about that a bit, the point of grammar is to make sense of language, right? And maybe to be specific so you can get a more specific meaning across. So I know that you're talking past tense,
okay,
or current present tense. But yeah, as long as it's achieving all that, then you don't need it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. That's a cool. I should have mentioned that when I'm doing exams. Did you understand what I meant? Well, then just give me full marks. Yes. Was there a confusion that I wasn't talking past tense? Well, then you can take some marks off. Yes, but yeah, because like French has a lot of that, man. Far out the conjugation.
Absolutely. It has a lot.
Yeah, which, I mean, this is another good thing about learning languages. Then you can, because as an English speaker, I think you think. So, again, I'm just going to try and help anyone that doesn't speak French understand. In French, at least the way I was taught, you break it down by je, I, tu, you. Vous is you as well, but a more formal, polite way. Nous is we. And what else is there? Votre, your. Sure. I know I'm saying this terribly. Votre. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, there was 6, right? And you need to learn how to conjugate. So
right.
If it's, what is it? What's je? I am.
Je suis.
Oh no. Yeah. Okay. Well, we can go with that. Je suis. You are. Tu es.
Tu es.
We are. Nous est. Is it? No. Nous avons or something like that.
Nous avons is. I think that's.
We have.
Yeah.
Jeez, I'm really rusty on French. The point is though, you have to say it slightly. You need to remember tu obviously, but then the word sort of changes.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah. And I guess it happens a little bit in English, but I think it's much less.
Yeah, less than French.
Yeah, it's more. English has more of a, what do you call it? Consistent way it happens. I think. Like
maybe.
Let me try. I'm trying to think.
It's maybe just feels more consistent.
Yeah,
it's your first language.
That's the other thing I'm thinking. Because I'm just thinking that we're going, we went. That's totally different.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We're eating, we ate. Similar. But then you ate, I ate. I mean, that doesn't change. So yeah. Anyway, the cool thing when you're learning all this is to think like, is this efficient? Why? You know, and then I don't know. Just because you'd never think about this if you didn't speak other languages. And then like Japanese.
That's right.
Japanese is actually pretty epic in that way. I feel like it's simpler than English in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And then they have they even have in Japanese casual, which you never really learn in a book, but it's like the laziest and it's epic. So you can use it with your friends, and it's like so many grammatical rules just don't apply, and it's just like just lazy. But it's cool because especially as a learner, like this is sweet. I can forget about all these formal rules.
It's fantastic. Yeah. Same with Chinese.
Okay, yeah. But then it's cool because in the books they typically teach you formal, and I think that's smart because you don't want to be like a rude foreigner when you're over there. It's better to be overly polite, right? So, yeah. You're just bringing back these memories with French actually, because I put in quite a bit of time to get fluent, like good at French, and then I remember starting to use it, and everybody would use tu, or tu, and then I was like, oh my god, now I have to. It's a big deal to like think about the different, because I never practiced using the informal French at any point. So all of the verbs and everything had to change, and I was like, damn. But the way that it
it was a big shock.
She said, "Je suis vu."
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Use vu with me. It was actually not too bad because, as you said, the tu form is same as je. So I just started to think about. I just used all the same verbs that I would use for myself, which was really great.
And you weren't worried about making a mistake.
Yeah. It wasn't. Yeah. It was, but it was a big shock to be like, oh crap! Like, there's a whole other system now.
Yeah.
And then the other thing was like pronunciation. That like because if you just think about like the language learning courses, it's so robotic. Chapter 1. Nobody speaks like that. Yeah. So then, of course, the French that you learn is also very robotic and nobody speaks like that. So then that was the other thing, because as I said, I paid attention to the sounds of the language, but the sounds of the actual language were vastly different to what I was being exposed to in these language learning courses.
I'm curious because
lazy.
I'm ignorant about this. Different parts of France, do they have different French accents?
Of course.
Yeah.
Just like in different parts of Australia, different parts of America.
Yeah.
America versus UK.
So did you choose which accent you wanted to
Parisian,
cultivate?
man.
Yeah, baby. All right, nice. Because it's the same in Japanese, but I even find it hard to tell the difference.
Right.
Yeah. They use slightly different words some places, but yeah. Nice. Well, man, tell me your journey.
I think it also started in primary school, and I think when my brother, who's 3 years younger than me, when he went through languages...
L'enfant. Yeah.
L'enfant. You're just going to throw in random French words in? That's cute.
Yeah, and Japanese.
Okay.
Kodomo. Yes.
What does that mean? Child?
Yeah.
So I think when he went through, you had a choice of 2 languages, German or Japanese. But when I went through, it was just German for whatever reason. And I was good, actually. My German teacher really liked me, and she encouraged me to like take German more seriously. And my parents were thinking about giving me extra German lessons outside of school. We never really did that. I don't know why. Probably just to bother or money or something. But we never really did that.
That was year 1 to 5?
Yeah, primary school. Yeah. So then, man, to be honest, there was like no languages until like a university, really.
You did international baccalaureate, didn't you?
For a little while. I didn't actually I did GCSE, like I did the British equivalent of HSC for a while. Okay. And then I was going to go into IB, but then we switched. I came back to Australia and I ended up doing HSC.
Okay.
So at my school, I don't think anybody did a language for HSC. Maybe a couple of people.
It's kind of a shame, do you think?
Yeah, well, it was a blue-collar school. I mean, everybody was going to become a tradie, and you don't need to learn fucking Italian. So, but to be honest, man, here's where my actual language learning journey began, like the true one, like intentional about it, was I was in 4th year doing my honors degree in chemistry, having just the best time. And my brain was incredibly active doing all this stuff. And so I couldn't sleep. And sometimes I would literally spend 5 hours in bed, just couldn't sleep.
Too busy, excited and thinking about chemistry.
Yeah, no. Yeah, I was. Cool. And my brain was just on fire trying to solve all of these problems. And so then I was like, and it just was awful because, you know, when you chronically don't have sleep, it's just terrible for you. So then I was like, okay, so long as I'm not getting any sleep, let me just listen to something and maybe I'll learn something subliminally. So I just went on to BitTorrent and typed in language learning. That's it. And the top thing that came up was a course called Michel Thomas, French. And I was like, I like the way French sounds. Let me just download that and have that play in my ears while I'm sleeping, basically. So that's how I started learning French. And it was very revolutionary because the way that he teaches it is like, he first says, you should be totally relaxed, which I was like, okay, cool. I'm trying to sleep anyway. So I am totally relaxed. And he's like, the responsibility for language learning is on me, not you. You as the learner should just relax, and all of the responsibility on teaching is on me. That really made a big impact on me. And I still do that to the present day, where in my lectures, I'm like, you guys just relax. I've got this. So long as you're here and listening, all of it will be explained to you. Just relax. And if there are any questions or if anything's not explained well, that's my fault, not yours. So there's no pressure on you whatsoever. So I was like, okay, like in my mind, I was like, I thought language learning was really difficult and I had to focus. But I was like, okay, he must know better than me. So like, let me just relax and see what happens. And so it's just true, like that your brain is better at picking things up when you're relaxed. So I would just magically, and it was basically like they would say a sentence and then have you repeat the sentence. And then they would say the sentence in English and be like, how would you say this in French? And
the same one or a different?
It might be like, they might tell you like, I got it in French. And then they might say, well, how would you say you got it? You know, something like that.
Cool. Yeah.
And it was interesting because so the teacher was Michelle Thomas, and then they would have two other students and then you. So sometimes he would ask the other student, how would you say this? And then you would hear the student say it. And then it just felt like you were in a classroom with them. So it was probably like 100 hours or something like that, in that way. And it was just amazing how you kind of pick things up. And I ended up having like almost my first mindfulness experience, because I wasn't in mindfulness. You're often very relaxed, but very precise with your focus. And I'd never, like, when I was listening to these conversations, everything is important, because the way it sounds is important. The grammar is important. Like every little bit about what he says is important. And so I noticed that I began to listen to him in a way that is way deeper than I would listen to people typically when they were speaking English. Because even if you're not concentrated, if they say something, you kind of get it. It's comprehended without trying. You hear something and you understand it. Now you have to actively listen. And so I found that just came into my life, where I just was like, I was listening to people in so much of a deeper way, noticing like little ways that they would pronounce things, little grammar things that maybe, because as you said with French, grammar is like on another level. So then it made me pay attention to English grammar more, because English and French, as you said, are related. So it actually made my English better, learning French. It made me a better teacher because of this way of teaching languages. And then it made me a much better listener. And I almost felt retrospectively guilty, because I was like, is this the level that you're supposed to be listening at, like in normal life? And I just turned the volume up on everything, and it got me really excited.
Does that mean you also, whenever you're learning now, you relax?
I was so relaxed.
And you feel like it's their teacher's responsibility?
Yeah. I have that now. To this day, I relax completely. And I trust the teacher. And sometimes, that teacher's not the best teacher, so then you move on to a next teacher. It doesn't really matter. But it was it was so important for me learning French for so many reasons other than language learning. And so
nice. Did you get more sleep as well?
Yeah, I did. I began slowly to get more sleep. Yeah. Which is really nice. And then I would listen to these things while I was awake, walking home, I'd listen to a tape or something like that.
That's cool. I find that would be hard. I imagine if I tried doing that, I would have to stop and then sleep. Did you just find yourself becoming tired and then you're like, I'll stop
sleep
now?
Yeah. And then, let's say that I listened to a track while I was sleeping and didn't get it. I would just listen to that track again the next day or whatever. So I probably went through that first kind of learning course multiple times. And then I just totally got hooked. I was like, wow, this is awesome. I'm just going to keep learning. So I then eventually just got my hands on as many different like French resources I possibly could.
So like textbooks and things like
textbooks and language learning courses. I probably bought like a dozen language learning courses just to have comprehensible input. Because even if you're doing another beginner's course, I just like to hear it. I like to hear the sounds. I like to be exposed to comprehensible input. Yeah. So yeah, I did a ton of, and then I forgot, but I actually did a language learning beginner's course, like at the university, through like an open education, like continuing education program.
And this was after that, all that?
Yeah, after all of that.
What language did you choose?
It was French.
Okay. Yeah.
I was just all in on French. Yeah, I did. So then I was like, I'm not going to do that again. I'll just keep learning by myself. And then I got to a point where I was like, I'm just going to try and expose to myself to as much of the language as I possibly can. So Eventually I kept studying French while I was at law school. And so when on my way back, I would listen to like lectures on French law in French. I wouldn't understand. I'd understand maybe 5%, but it didn't matter because I was just exposing my brain to the sound of the language. And then eventually I'd understand maybe 10%, then maybe 15%, and just got better.
Nice. Yeah, that's interesting you say that, man, because I feel like as a language learner, you can find it depressing. Like when I listen to, if I watch like a film in Japanese and that, a lot I don't understand. And you could maybe find that frustrating and that would put you off doing that. But I'm wondering now if you just accept, or maybe if you look at the bright side, hey, I understand some of this.
Right.
And then just keep doing that over time. Yeah, because in that way it's not a disappointing, upsetting thing. It's more a interesting and exciting thing. Doing that more over time, you'll understand more and more.
Yeah.
I can actually see how that would happen, yeah.
Well, I was just like, for me, it's like, first of all, it just sounds beautiful. So let's just, all language learning aside, it just sounds beautiful. So I was like, great, this is a great thing for me to listen to. And then secondly, I would compare myself, let's say that...
Do you think all languages sound beautiful? Or are you just biased to French?
I think I was biased, yeah. I think French sounds beautiful. I think Chinese sounds really beautiful. There are certain languages that I think sound beautiful. I didn't think German sounded beautiful. So then, it's one of the reasons I was probably less attracted to it.
Mm-hmm. Sorry for all our German listeners.
Entschuldigung. Yes!
Was that some German, mate?
Yeah.
I don't really understand any German. So. Is that sorry? No. It's not sorry.
Yeah, basically it means like, excuse me.
Okay.
So, what was I saying? Yeah, no. So, but I wouldn't compare myself, because the other thing is like, let's say at that point I'd been learning French for a year. I was like, okay, I don't understand this lecture on French law. Would a 1-year-old understand it? No. Get over yourself.
Yes. Good.
So then it's like, okay, you're 5 years into French. Is your French at a level that a 5-year-old would speak it at? Yes. Or is it better or no? Whatever. So then I would just compare myself to that. And that made it... I mean, but I never really tore myself down for like not being at a certain level, because for me there was never a reason to learn French. So there was never an expectation that I would be at any level. And I had no plans to go to France. And there was no exam coming up. So it was always just, and now that I think about it, I'm like that with almost everything that I learn, actually. There are no final exams anymore. And even when there are final exams, the way that I look at exams, if I'm honest, is I took this course because I'm interested in it. And now I get to tell you about what's so cool about it. So every question on the exam is like, tell me about this thing that you're really interested in. And I'm like, okay, cool, I'll tell you about it.
What a good way to look at it, man. Nice. And that's why you get great marks.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, but it's like, I don't put that pressure on myself. And I don't think it's necessary. And as I said, all learning happens way better when you're relaxed.
Yeah.
So just relax.
Nice. Yeah, another thing I've found learning languages is, I think we spoke about this in a previous podcast, how there's like, for me, I feel like it's like I'm climbing this mountain, learning things, and then I'm learning more and more and becoming more proficient, and then I look out from this new vantage point,
right,
and realize how many things I still don't know.
That's right. And
it's probably more things than I realized, you know.
Yep, that's right.
And because to me that stems from the fact that I guess you assume that because you probably kind of have to, that language is similar to the one you speak in all ways. And what I mean by that is like, like even now I haven't really bothered to learn it, but if you're counting bottles in Japanese, you use different words for like 1 bottle, 2 bottles, 3 bottles. Whereas in English, it's just 1, 2, 3, just like you count 1, 2, 3, you know? But in Japanese, no. If you're saying 1, 2, 3, it's ichi ni san. If you're saying 1 bottle, it's ippon.
Right.
2 bottles, Nippon, I think it is, and whereas, yeah. Anyway, that's consistent actually. But anyway, I just remember at certain
Yeah.
you know yeah, like there's just changes like that you, if you're assuming it was the same as English, there's no change in English. So then you start to realize, oh my gosh, like maybe there's other areas that also have changes that I don't know about yet.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and then so for me it was like it's a bit of a roller coaster, and then I feel ecstatic. Oh, cool! I'm understanding a lot more, and then I see what I don't know, and it's yeah, like a bit of a downer again because I'm like, oh, there's still a lot to learn ahead. Yeah. Anyway, absolutely worth it. Another thing I think about language is, I don't think it's ever time you'll regret spending having spent trying to learn a language.
Yeah, I've never regretted.
Yeah. It's always time well spent.
It's like going to the gym.
It's interesting because I feel like a lot of people, like you said it for your school, like, well, you don't need to learn Japanese. Like how's that going to help your life? How's that going to help your job? Whatever. It's much more important than that, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so mind expanding.
Yeah. And then it will have a lot of cool random serendipitous moments, I think.
Yeah, like one thing that we've talked about recently is like even little things like Uber driver, or I picked up an air conditioning unit from this guy, and it was like I liked being able to say thank you in their language. Where I was like, I think from your accent you're Russian, right? He's like, yeah, I am. And I'm like, oh, spasiba. And he's like, oh, пожалуйста. It was like really nice to have that little interaction. So just being able to say little things like thank you, hello, tiny little things are so well appreciated, especially by those like Russian, Chinese, like languages that are like maybe less. Everybody knows how to say bonjour. Everybody knows how to say gracias or whatever. There were some things that everybody knows, dankeschön, you know. yeah. But if you could say it in Turkish, teşekkür, they love it.
That's another cool thing I noticed. Again, actually, I've had it for both Japan and Korea. Actually, and more countries, but they're the ones I've learnt most. Even in I learned a little bit of Cantonese in Hong Kong.
Cool.
But anytime, people appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it's cool because I guess it's like saying, hey, I respect your culture and I've put some effort into trying to learn it.
That's right.
Even though I'm ignorant AF, you know. Yeah, and then especially if you're a little bit more proficient, it's just insightful for everyone, you know.
I remember when I was learning Cantonese in Boston, this one guy was like, yeah, I was for a while, but then I just got so discouraged. And I was like, oh, why? And he was like telling me about like how the grammar is so different. And I was like, well, you know, I just ignore grammar totally. And I go, okay, the grammar is different. Awesome. Like, let's learn a new grammar, you know? And I basically explained to him that like, if you are expecting the grammar to be similar, you're always going to be disappointed. Whereas if you have no expectations that this language is going to be similar in some way, and you embrace that it's going to be different, and also that the language that you're learning has been learnt by millions of people, and you're a smart person. So if all of those people have learned it, surely you at least have the CPU to learn it. So yeah, I remember talking to him next time, and he was like, "Oh, you started using this app to learn Cantonese."
Yeah, baby.
It was so good.
Nice. That's a good way. Another nice way to think about it would be, the grammar's different. Excellent. You can learn a different way of thinking.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it would kind of be a shame if it was just different words, but in the same order and rules and everything. Because then you wouldn't have a lot of the benefits.
It's a shame when things are easy. You know, like when you go, oh, that was easier than I was expecting. That's a shame. You know, when it's difficult and then you overcome it, you're like, oh, yeah. Like when you said like you get to the top of the mountain, then you see that there's actually a bigger mountain or whatever. That feeling always excites me, man.
Cool.
When the landscape is way bigger than, okay, in the beginning, it's like daunting.
Yeah.
And then you can embrace that and go, okay, fantastic. Nice. There's so much more to learn.
My man, I like that way. Sorry, I like that way of thinking.
Yeah. For me, it's just true. Like whenever I've learned something that ended up being simplistic, I was like, oh, you know, it's always a little bit of a downer. So I would much rather be a novice in something that is incredibly difficult. And people sometimes ask, like, what's the most difficult language to learn, as if that means that you're more intelligent. And I think that just, like, for me, it's like, if you have the interest in learning that language, you'll find a way. For me, the most difficult language to learn is the one that I'm least interested in learning.
Yeah.
Where it's just a slog, you have to do it.
Yeah.
So yeah, this whole thing about tones, Cantonese has 9 tones, and then unfortunately that's like a deterrent to a lot of people. But it's like, look, millions of other people have learnt it, and if you ask them, they don't think about tones. I remember asking, like, this person that was teaching me Cantonese at the time, I remember going, oh, was that 5th tone? And they had to, like, think about it, which means that when they're using the language, they don't think, okay, 5th tone, so therefore I'm going to go for this tone. No, it just comes out naturally. And then it's almost like grammar, this gets retrospectively imposed. So this whole tonal thing is like, it doesn't really, don't let it get you down, because like the native speakers do it automatically. And so it's clear that human brains can do it automatically, and you have a human brain. So therefore you have the ability to do it automatically as well. So I just didn't pay attention to it. It's easy to put barriers in your way that make it seem really difficult to learn a language. But the fact of the matter is that if you expose your brain to enough comprehensible input, it'll make sense of it for you. So that's how you learn your first language, and one language, so you have the capacity to do it. So then you can do it again.
Part of that, enhancing that process might be, like you said, the acceptance of, it's not taking the responsibility, or not putting the pressure on yourself. Sorry, I should say.
Yeah, that's right.
Because I think if you're putting that pressure on yourself, somehow that might stifle you in.
Yeah.
Yeah, and even if you're not enjoying it, and therefore you stop, as opposed to just letting it be, letting it wash over you and
right,
immersed in it.
Yeah, I really think that this is like a meta thing where it's like, okay, why is there pressure? Okay, there's pressure because I'm not where I'm supposed to be. Okay, well, where are you supposed to be? Okay, then you realize like there are these expectations that you've been placing on yourself. Okay, so why are you placing those expectations on yourself? And then you realize, okay, there's no real reason. So then it's like, as I said, either you can let go of those expectations, or you can give yourself realistic expectations. Like, for instance, with my thing where it was like, I'm 1 year old in French. Okay, would a 1-year-old be able to listen to this lecture and understand it? No. So then it's like, okay, fantastic. I'm at a 1-year-old level. Who cares? So I think, a lot of this is and as I say, this is a meta principle, because it doesn't just apply to language learning, where it's like, where am I at in life? Where am I at with my finances? Where am I at? Blah, blah, blah.
The other cool thing about that is, I feel like 4-year-olds, you can converse with them well enough, like
right,
so well enough that you could pretty much do anything.
I know,
you can communicate
really
anything to them, right?
Yeah. That's
and
true.
Therefore, if you get to that level in any language, you're all sweet.
Yeah.
And I also, do you think the more proficient you get at a language, the easier it is to learn more of it? I think
more of it, and other languages too.
Yeah, because I found that as well, and in Japanese, it's the epic moments, exciting moments for me is when you're talking in Japanese to a Japanese person, and then you're learning new vocab in Japanese by being like, either like, what is this? Or like, you dance around that word because you know a bunch of similar words, but you don't know the exact one, and then they will give it to you. Things like that is just very fun and cool. Yeah. Do you find that as well? I find myself like, there's a whole bunch of words and phrases I know very well, so I'll use them a lot, and then often they just cover so much ground,
right?
and I know, and sometimes I know it's fun. Like, so I used to know when you walk into a lot of stores in Japan, they say "irashaimase," which means like welcome, but it means welcome to a store.
Okay.
And so I remember like my Japanese friend came back to Australia, and I was like "irashaimase," and they're like, that's not like the right context. Like it's funny, they're laughing because it's hilarious, but it's not the right context.
Okay, cool.
So I think it is actually yokoso. Anyway, but that, which also means welcome, but in a different context. You know what I mean? But yeah, you can get away with saying the wrong thing because they know what you mean, you know, and then they might tell you, oh, it's actually, yeah. Just like how I appreciate a non-English speaker. They'll say something funny. I know what you mean, and good effort. Not quite well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's I love things when you discover things like that where there's no real way to there's no equivalent in English. You know, when you learn a word in another language where it's like, what does that actually mean? Then you're like, okay, it's going to take me a little while to explain what that means actually. Yeah. So because we only have one word, welcome, and then it turns out that they actually have different types of, but it's not as if they were like, it's not as if they started with the word for welcome and then broke it up.
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So I love that actually.
Yeah. Yeah, me too. I'm curious, have you had the experience of thinking in French?
I've had dreams where I was like bilingual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Have you been to France?
Nope.
Damn, that's amazing. It's interesting because you would imagine someone learning a language, one thing they want to do is go to that country and speak that language.
Yeah, as I said, it was like I was trying to get to sleep.
Yeah.
You know, that was my motivation. So, and then I just really like the sound of actually on this thing of like when there isn't the exact word, one thing that's really cool in French is any word that ends in ION, you can just say it with a French accent and it'll be the right word. Like the word for nation is French is nation. Easy. So I think there's like 1,300 words you just already have in French, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But there are a few what's the word, like exceptions to that rule. And one of them is actually translation, which I really like because it goes to this point that sometimes there isn't the right translation. So the word for translation in French is traduction, which is like transduction, which is, I think, is better than translation because when you go from one language to the next, it's not as if there's a one-to-one correspondence. It gets transduced and changed.
Yeah, cool.
Which is just awesome.
Yeah.
To give you, I think the other ones that are just so that you can, now you have 1,300 French words straight away. I think the other ones that are violations or exceptions is, okay, so traduction is one. Oh, another one is vacation, vacances. For some reason, vacation in French is pluralized, which is funny because when it was explained to me, it's like, because French people always take a ton of vacation, you know? So it's les vacances. There's no vacation. That's not a word. Explanation is really nice. Explanation is not explanation, but explication, to make explicit, which I really like. And then there's one. Oh, so traduction. Yeah. So those are the only exceptions. And so now you have
the only ones.
Yeah.
Damn.
You have 1,300 French words.
That's
which
crazy.
is awesome.
Nice.
So yeah, as I said, accent is a lot of it. Even if you speak English with a French accent in France, it'll be easier for them to kind of integrate that and understand it. And for me, it's like as soon as I think about using a French accent, French words come out. Like it's that sound is so related or so linked in my mind to that way of expressing myself. So yeah, for me, sonically, that's the way that I get into a language. I really like the sound of it. And languages are primarily sounds. I know that we have writing, but writing came way later than spoken language. So I always find that I want to get into language spoken first, and then once you have the spoken, the written is always just a reflection of the spoken. So then I always start with the spoken, and with conversational French, it's like you never have to be able to you never have to if you don't want to, you don't ever have to be able to read or write, I think, to be able to converse in French. But the benefit as an English speaker is even if you don't really know how to read and write in French, you can probably guess a lot of the words.
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there are some benefits to learning French as an English speaker, that's for sure.
Yeah. I felt the same. So for me with my Japanese, I had like the a bit of high school experience, but again, I didn't put much effort in. So I feel like you could learn how much I knew very quickly if you actually applied yourself, if you know what I mean. but then I started studying it just for fun. Kind of like you, yeah. No, not taking any formal courses, just wanting to. I can't even remember what. I just wanted to learn it. Yeah, I think also like there's a lot of incredibly good Japanese gymnasts and things like that. So again, I'm like, hey, I feel what I love,
yes,
and they're so good at it. This is cool. You know what? How are they so good at it? So just and like you say, the transduction. Yes, like you can watch a documentary of a Japanese gymnast translated and get the idea, but if you learn Japanese and watch it, you'll get a deeper insight. One thing I loved about that way of thinking was when I was training in Japan, and I asked some of the Japanese gymnasts that I was training with, who were very good, what they thought of Kohei Ichimura. They said, "Tensai desu. He's a genius." And I thought that is a really different way of thinking about it, because an Australian person would say he's a freak. Yeah. And because I know that because I live in Australia, and like talking to any Australian person, that's what they would say, or most of them. And I'm like, to turn someone from a freak to a genius, that's a different way of thinking about it, you know? And I find the Japanese way of thinking about it much more inspiring.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. It's much more resonant with me as a person. That's another thing I noticed when and this is an epic thing about traveling and learning about different cultures and learning different languages, because that's part of different cultures, is I feel like it's identifying your own personal culture. Yes. And it doesn't have to be where you live. I feel like a lot of people probably just assume like, all right, well, I'm Australian, so the fact that I don't like to drink a lot, it makes me a bit weird.
Okay.
But no, like if you go to a different culture, maybe the way you feel about that is very in line with that culture. Yeah. I don't know. There's something about that's liberating. And then I think ultimately, like,
yes,
you can take parts of every culture that you like, and that can be how you are, and that's fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a whole community of people that are like you in that aspect, so it doesn't make you weird. It makes you a genius.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's great. You know, breaking through, and it goes back to the last podcast about your worldview has to be wholly personal, forged through the fire of your questioning.
Very good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's definitely one of the benefits of traveling. I think Nick and I find that, I don't want to speak on for you, Nick, but like the thing I love most about traveling is meeting people, learning about the culture. It's
definitely.
It's not seeing the sights.
Yeah.
I mean, that's cool when it's cool if I'm doing that with locals.
Yes, exactly.
I don't really find it fulfilling to just see the things, you know. I would much rather spend a normal day in the life in your country as 100%. Your culture.
Yep.
And that's so insightful for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious, hey, because you're like, nice to meet you. Epic to be in your country. Let's just do a normal mundane day, please.
Let's just get a sandwich.
Yeah.
No, because I just remember like one of the most boring days I had in India was like going and seeing the Taj Mahal. I was like, I don't care. I don't give a shit about this. Yeah. You know, it was fine.
Yeah.
But actually the most interesting thing was like getting there, because our tour guide was like, let's get there at like 5 a.m. so that there is no tourists. And it was cool because we actually got to take pictures where it was just us, which is epic.
At the Taj Mahal.
Yeah.
Damn.
And we got to see the sunrise over the Taj Mahal, which is awesome. But what was interesting to me is like just seeing how...
Was that a spiritual experience, would you say?
I wouldn't say it was spiritual, though.
just beautiful.
Why does it become spiritual when it's the sunrise over a certain building?
Well, sometimes some things are so beautiful that I do feel like...
Sure.
I feel awe, I guess, you know?
Yeah, I know. But what I was going to say is that what was most interesting to me is like going through the village to get there and seeing the normal people that live in that area, and how some of them were already up and a lot of them were like already doing morning exercise and stuff. The other thing that was really interesting in India is when you travel through the villages, there are certain places where they're like, come here and get an MBA. It's so crazy. Being in villages, they're advertising, get a degree here. And I started asking our taxi driver, I noticed that whenever we go through villages, you can get like an MBA, you can get like a degree in computer science. I said, why is it that, like, it's crazy because as you would go through, it's not what you would expect. It's definitely not what I would expect, that I would see all these banners being like, you can get a degree here. And he said, look, basically the idea is that this is how you get out of here. You get an MBA and then you can get out of here. So it's fascinating. I definitely did not expect to see the words letters MBA in a village where these people barely have enough clean water to drink. So nah, man, those kinds of experiences were just the absolute best. And I remember like the mate that I was traveling with, he noticed that whenever we'd go out to restaurants, we would always go out to like the fancy Westerner places where all the Westerners ate. And he didn't like it because it felt disconnected. And he also felt that we were getting ripped off, which, you know, almost certainly was true. So he's like, can we eat in the locals thing? And he was like, the taxi driver was like, I'm not sure you want to do that. And, you know, the truth of the matter is, first of all, like the food was worse. And also the food was not as safe. And my friend ended up getting food poisoning, actually.
Yeah.
So there were some downsides, but, you know, he wanted to see how the real people lived. And I was super interested in that as well.
Yeah. I find that it's also a hard thing to do, hey? Because I'm still probably figuring this out, but when I was living in Japan, and anywhere like this, I want to drop into the regular... I guess the way to do that would be to get a regular job. But, I mean, that's a huge commitment, so I don't want to do that. But, you know what I mean?
Right.
Right. I almost... Like, I tried to do it with a gymnast where I would be like... I want to train with you guys. Then I want to like, well, I don't know, what do you guys do after training? Like, but you can't invite yourself to these things, right? But yeah, it's funny. It's not like I wouldn't enjoy like, let's go out and party because that's what you think I want to do.
Yes.
I would be like, let's go and do whatever you would normally do.
Yes.
Because I'm curious to see what that is.
Yeah.
You know?
They're always reluctant, hey, because they want to give you the best possible experience.
Yeah.
Which is always hugely removed from what they would actually normally do.
Exactly. Yeah. So probably for me, a really cool experience for that was I lived with one of the students in Osaka for a week, and I freaking loved it. Like he'd make me breakfast, and I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing, man. I got to stay with him where he lived, epic, and just like getting around that little town. It was really, really freaking cool. Just going to like little local restaurants.
Yes.
Yeah. That was great.
But so I did the same thing when I went back to South Africa, and I remember I was living with my auntie, and she was just like, I think she went to like one of the local like tourist offices and like got a pamphlet and was like, here are all the things you can do in Cape Town as a tourist, and like circled the ones that she thought I would enjoy most. And I was like, can we do none of that, please? I want to go grocery shopping with you, and then I want to go to the gym. And then, like, I want to come to your church and see what your church is like. And it was just the best. It was so nice.
Are we weird in that respect? As in...
No, we're geniuses.
Yeah. Nah. But what I mean is, like, to be a good host to other people...
No, what? Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I'm trying to
What I mean is it's all just a perspective, right?
Yeah. I guess you can just ask a person... Do you want me to take you around to the things that tourists typically like to do? Or do you want me to just show you what I normally do in this part of the world? Yeah. Yeah,
I don't think it makes us weird or anything, but yeah, it's like, that's just the experience, that kind of experience that I want to have. And I find that to be... Because
just don't take it too literally. I sit at my desk most of the day. Yes, welcome.
Sure, yeah. What I was going to say is that actually, what I've personally found is that all over the world, where tourists go, it doesn't feel like you really left home, because you get there and okay, there's a McDonald's here. The fuck, you know. Feels like the McDonald's back home, and people kind of speak English, and street signs look the same, and the roads look the same, and the buildings look the same, and the people basically look the same. And it's almost like you never left. Okay, there's an Eiffel Tower here, or there's a Taj Mahal, or there's a something that's different. But culturally speaking, I find that there is kind of like an international culture now that I think is actually becoming increasingly more uniform. Just because of the internet and globalization, right? Like everybody now has access to the internet, Instagram, and all those things. And so my feeling is that there is this increasing Americanization of the world where everybody watches, even in Australia, we watch American films, we watch American TV shows. There are Australian TV shows and movies, but they're way less popular even in Australia than American films. So that's just true everywhere, right? Like that there's this Americanization of the entire world. So you can kind of go anywhere and it'll feel like America. Yeah, so I've seen that, and I think it's a shame that you would go all the way to France or all the way to Italy or all the way to India and eat Subway, which we did a couple of times, but
especially if you're staying in like a 5-star hotel.
Yes.
I feel like they're all
the same.
Pretty much the same. Yeah.
Shangri-La is the same everywhere, my friend.
Yeah.
Four Seasons is the same everywhere.
Yeah.
So
where's the optimal place to stay?
It depends on what you want,
Yeah.
I remember when we were backpacking in India, like we tried to have the local experience, and then eventually we crossed from India into Nepal, and then I remember thinking like, okay, I want a break from this. So I ended up staying in a 4-star hotel and being like, oh, thank goodness, like, and then I went back into So I don't know. Depends on what you want and how long you want it for.
Yeah.
So man, like, are there any like epic experiences that you can think of where like you're like, I'm so grateful that I learned Japanese?
I mean, firstly, yes, I'm sure there are. I'm just gonna try and think of some. Things that pop to mind is like funny, completely random. So especially when I'm in Australia, say, and like it becomes useful. It's just cool because you wouldn't expect it. You know what I mean? Or the other person wouldn't expect it.
Yes.
And then maybe I don't think there's a great answers, but anyway, that is what's coming to mind. I was watching this documentary on Uchimura.
Yeah.
Miracle Body. Yes. Miracle Body. Yes. And it's I think it's like a Japanese series where they profile different athletes.
Cool.
And they like scientifically analyze. It's really good. But watching that again and using less of the subtitles and listening more to it, and then just noticing like, oh yeah, like the subtitle says that's what it means, but not quite. Again, it's
right.
That's the translation, but the meaning is a little bit different. That's not a perfect translation. You know what I mean? I don't know. Just having that insight and then being able to, you know what I mean? More purely understand the thing. It's just, it's cool.
One epic experience of yours that I think of is when Uchimura was in Australia, as part of that workshop.
Yeah.
And you were the only person that could talk to him. Like he was sitting there, and you were like, "Why is nobody talking to this freak? This is a gold mine."
Yeah.
Of experience, and you were the only person that had that ability to go down and sit with him and like say, what do you think about this? And you were able to get a little bit of wisdom. I think that's epic.
Yeah, I do feel privileged. There were some other guys there that spoke Japanese, but I think of all the athletes, I was the only one. Yeah. And yeah, maybe other people were just shy as well. Yeah, that's true. In that moment, I also felt like, damn it, I wish I was
better.
Yeah, exactly. Because we'd talk about something, then he'd start going deeper, and then I'd be like, what kind of sense? Yeah. So that was, I guess you're off. That's going to be the reality until you're really, really deep into the language. How about you, man?
Oh, it's funny because the one epic experience that I had was when I actually ended up stopping learning French. Where I was like, okay, I'm good enough now, which is
how many years?
Probably 5 years in.
Oh, cool. So very proficient.
It was pretty proficient, yeah. So what I would do is I would, if I ever heard somebody speaking French, I would just go up to them and start speaking French. And I was in the city on my way home, and there were this couple that was speaking French. I went up to them and started speaking French to them. And they always, as you said, they always really appreciate it when it's like they're in this foreign land and then somebody took the time to like learn their language. So then eventually I was like, oh, and are you guys visiting from France? You're French, right? They were like, no, are you? And I was like, yes,
Yeah.
I fooled them. So at that point, I was like, okay, my French accent is good enough that they thought I was French.
So you obviously were saying this in French.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's epic, man.
And I was like,
You passed
okay,
the
mission
test.
accomplished.
Yeah,
There we go, baby.
Yes.
So, and it's just, that's just, as I said, that's kind of the way I am. Like, I learn something it's usually just out of total curiosity and just randomness. In this case, I wanted to get to sleep. Random curiosity.
And
then
French, because it was the first thing on BitTorrent?
pretty much. And then I like the sound. I like
Okay,
the way it sounded.
So it was pretty
random.
It wasn't intentional or really considered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And then I'll get to a point where I feel that I'm at least proficient, and then I'll move on to something else because there's so much to learn. You've only got one life, and the thing about it is that the learning curve tapers off at a certain point. And so I want to get to a point where the learning curve tapers off, I'm proficient, and then I can move on to the next thing. And
love it, man. I feel like that's so counter to what most people would strive for, which is learn the things so you get past that. Or if you can avoid the steep learning curve, do that. Which is, not conducive to maximum growth, I suppose.
Right.
If you're always seeking that, then you will be.
I mean, there are downsides to being a jack of all trades because, like you never really get amazing at something.
Yeah.
So I remember my brother basically being like, you want to have like a T approach where like you're exceptional at one thing and then you're pretty good at like a few things. And it was funny because when I was at law school, actually, the guy that I studied with the most said, Nick, you're such a Renaissance man. And that's like the biggest compliment. Like I was like, oh, that's really cool. That's something to aim for, to be across the sciences and humanities. So yeah, once I got to that level, and the thing about it is like, in this introduction, it's probably the first time that I spoke French in like years. Cause I don't have the interest to practice, and I don't actually have the opportunity to practice that much either. But so that's the other thing with languages. It's like it's a very cognitively demanding thing. So your brain does not prioritize it if it's not around. So it got to that point, and then I was like, okay, let's move on to something else. It's probably where I started taking up jazz, and got to a point with that, and then I moved on.
And so, language-wise, what are the languages you speak, and what proficiency would you give each?
I would say that I only speak really English.
Yeah.
Speak a tiny bit of French that I could probably get better at if I put more time into.
I think you're being humble, man. I feel like your French is quite good.
It's okay, but
because from my 2 years of school, I don't think I'm that good. But I've known since if I watch a French film, I understand a lot of it.
Oh yeah.
And I'm like, that surprises me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So definitely.
That makes me think if I lived in France, I reckon within 6 months or less, I'd be pretty comfortable.
I honestly, I think there's a huge advantage as an English speaker.
Yeah.
And then for a little while I was learning German. For a little while I was learning Russian, but that didn't really take. The more recent language has been Mandarin. And then while I was in Boston, I was learning Cantonese. But my Cantonese is,
I love that.
It's very bad now.
When I was in Boston, I was learning Cantonese. Oh, that makes sense. Yes. Yeah. So what level are they at, do you think?
Oh, very, very beginner. Very beginner. One of the cool things about Chinese is that, so one of the cool things is with Mandarin versus Cantonese, okay, it sounds totally different, but the written language is the same, which is crazy.
Yeah.
That you have the same written language for two different spoken languages.
That's cool.
That's already amazing.
And even Japanese, it's different, but
right.
the kanji means the same thing most of the time. So again, it's pronounced differently, but yeah, Chinese people can kind of read Japanese and vice versa. Kind of. Like, I think you can almost get a gist of what they're talking about,
Yeah, what I was going to say is that one of the interesting thing, like, this is another thing that turns English speakers off Chinese, is that not just the tones, but the written language is incredibly complicated.
Yeah.
I think even people that are native speakers of Chinese would have to admit that the written language is very complicated. But what's interesting about the written language is that it's pictographic. So in English, I was gonna say like the words when you write them down kind of mean what they sound like, but it's not always true that you can, because English is not phonetic, so it's not always true that you know exactly what the word sounds like given the written word. Yeah, there are other languages that are phonetic, but Chinese is not really phonetic at all. I mean, for some characters, like you can look at the character and it'll give you a hint about how it's pronounced by basically being like it's pronounced like this other word that you know. But one of the really cool things about Chinese is that the character is often understandable. Like before, you showed me the censure thing, and I was like, oh, see this little part of the character? This radical means fire, and it's like it's obvious that it means fire once you know it.
Yeah.
So I remember walking around in Boston in Chinatown, and I saw these characters, and I understood what it meant by like breaking down the characters into their constituent radicals, which is just so freaking cool. It was American Heart Association, which is kind of complicated, but the Chinese character for heart looks like a heart. It legit looks like a heart, which is it's freaking cool with all like the chambers and stuff.
And love is associated with it.
And love has the heart radical in there as well. Association has the power, the character for power just 3 times. So that kind of makes sense. And then American is 美国. It just sounds like America in Chinese. So then I was like, oh, okay, like that means American Heart Association, which is, you could never do that. If you had the words American Heart Association in English, you could never look at those words and figure out what they mean. But in Chinese, you can figure out the meaning. You can sometimes, not always, figure out the meaning by just simply looking at the character, which is freaking cool. And then the other thing about Chinese is that it's such an ancient language. And so you can actually see how these characters have evolved from like ancient times when they were written on whatever, papyrus or whatever, or on stone. Sometimes when they were back in the day when they were writing things in stone, as you can imagine, it was less cursive. It was really difficult to do cursive things on a stone. So you can see all these like things go from being like more fluid to like a little bit more rigid because you've got to do things with like a pick and a chisel or whatever. So you see that then comes into the language, and then it comes back out into ink and stuff like that. So it goes back out into being fluid, and then there's simplified Chinese now versus traditional, where now there's a simplified version where it's like just easier to write. So then it's interesting seeing how, like, for instance, the Chinese symbol for horse, it looks like a horse. But then the simplified version just looks like the traditional version. So it looks less like a horse. So there's this just absolutely wonderful history of the written language of Chinese that is just such a different way of engaging with the language. It's very ancient and very deep. And it feels more primal to me, where, like, the symbol for person looks like a person. The word for person in English looks nothing like a person. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, like, all of these things that we think are impediments to the language which make it much more difficult are actually just richnesses that allow us to engage with the world in such a deeper way, right?
Yeah, and to think about.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
I just made up a word there, richnesses. That doesn't.
It's okay.
But you understood it, so I did. I got 100%.
Yeah. Very cool, man. Even hearing you say there's 9 different tonal sounds in Cantonese.
It's crazy.
It's like, that's overwhelming. Oh, I almost wanted to learn it just to experience thinking like that.
Yeah. But the thing is, like, for me, I never really focused on it. Like, I learnt the tones, and then I was like, speaking to a native speaker, they never think about tones. So I am not, as I said, like, there are certain ways that you can get into the language, like using R in Japanese when it's not really an R, that allow you to get in quickly, but then become bad habits. So then I was like, okay, if native speakers don't do it, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to think in terms of tones. I'm going to be aware that they exist, and then I'm going to whatever the word is, I'm going to let them go.
Yeah.
I'm going to transcend them. So, I like having less of a hook into the language, actually, and just coming at it like a baby would come at it. where, as you said, maybe you have slower progress in the beginning, but it's like, in my case, it's like, who cares? There's no exam at the end. There's no pressure on me to learn Cantonese within the next year. So, and as I said, like, that also for me encourages that relaxed mindset of there's no reason to go fast here. Let's just relax. And then it's interesting how quickly you can get to being able to express exactly what you need. Okay, maybe you can't have a conversation on the meaning of life, but you can be like, hey, like, thank you, hello, can I have some water? That was delicious. You know, you can, it's interesting because it kind of like also shows you what's really like, it shows you what subset of the language is actually really important for survival or just everyday life. And it's a much smaller subset of the possible superset of things that you can express. And it just goes to show that just with a few words, you can actually get pretty far, which is also pretty just interesting in itself, you know?
Yeah. So any plans to learn any more languages? And currently, are you working on any, or are you just, where are you at with it?
I'm not actively learning any, but every now and then I go back to Mandarin. So like I think level 5 in Mandarin on Duolingo or something like that. So every now and then
Is
I'll
that
go.
high?
I don't think so. I think there's like 40 levels or something. So every now and then I'll go back in and like just retest. For me, again, it's just the sound of the language. So sometimes I'll watch a series on Netflix in Mandarin, obviously with the English characters or English translation. But you know, there's a lot of Chinese people that live in Sydney, so every now and then I get to like listen to it on the bus or on the train or whatever. I just like listening to it. Every now and then I'll listen to a Chinese podcast just for shits and giggles, or Korean. You know, like I like Korean, like just like you, I like Korean media. Like I like Korean movies, Korean series, Korean music. Like I don't know. There's a lot of Korean. Like it's funny because on my YouTube there's like every now and then I get Korean ads, and I get Chinese ads.
What a compliment.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's it. Totally.
Yes.
They're like, oh, cool.
Yeah.
You know, wow, this ad's in Chinese. I think I'm Chinese. That's sweet. I love it.
Sure. Yes.
Yes. What about you, man?
Not at the moment. Maybe always open-minded to it. Actually, well, yesterday I randomly was, I had this hour-long drive from work. Once a week I work like an hour away. I don't know, I just don't like driving and wasting the time, even though that's not a waste, but it feels like a bit of a waste sometimes. Like I had the urge to do something productive while driving yesterday, and like I sort of exhausted all the podcasts and YouTube videos I'd want to watch, so I just put on like a random Japanese one, because I was like, at least, you know, but even then it was a little bit elementary. No, like it was, I mean, it was just a random thing, right? So it wasn't quite exactly what I would be looking for. So yeah, maybe if I find the right kind of simple thing to put on and listen to,
right,
I might just do that for Japanese, at least for now. I guess because I'm most familiar with Japanese, so
right,
it feels easiest to do without dedicating too much mind space to it, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I do.
Yeah, but other than that, at the moment, I'm just being an ignorant Australian.
No.
Yeah, and just working on other things. Yeah.
Well, on that note, man, like, let me switch gears a bit, and I wanted to tell you a little bit about the philosophy of language.
Nice.
Yes. And maybe we'll come back, as I mentioned, to that discussion around entropy, which I think it would be an interesting thing. But I wanted to tell you about a philosopher called Wittgenstein. And he's a very interesting character. Some say that he is the most important philosopher of the 20th century. He was born 1889, died 1951. And he was a student, in quotes, of Russell, Bertrand Russell, who we talked about in the Sympathy podcast. And he began with. So what's really interesting about Wittgenstein is that we have to break him up into the early Wittgenstein and the late Wittgenstein. It's almost like you have two philosophers in one, because there was like one very strong school with respect to the philosophy of language in his early days, which was very influential. And then there was a later Wittgenstein that kind of like revised everything that he said before in his later days. And so he began, he was very technical person. He grew up in Austria and at first studied mechanical engineering, later switched over to aeronautical engineering. He was growing up around the time that the airplane was invented. And so his thought was that he was going to go on to the University of Manchester and do a PhD in aeronautical engineering. And actually, like, I think there are pictures of like propellers and stuff that he actually designed and built. But he eventually was like, in order to get any good at this, I'm going to have to dive more into math, and found like a real interest in like math theory, and read two. He probably read more than two books, but he read two famous books. One of them was The Principles of Mathematics by Bertrand Russell. And the other was The Foundations of Arithmetic by Gottlob Frege. And Frege, I think, was in Germany at the time, so pretty close to Austria. And so Wittgenstein one day decides, I'm going to go to the University of Jena and talk to this guy. And so he goes, do you think I should keep learning about the philosophy of mathematics and stuff? And Frege's like, yeah, like totally, don't do it with me. You should go to Cambridge and study with Bertrand Russell. It was funny because like Wittgenstein was like, he was said to be very intimidated by Frege, very smart guy, and was like, this guy wiped the floor with me, but he encouraged me to keep going, so I'll just keep going. And so anyway, Bertrand Russell, there's a written account of this. Bertrand Russell goes, this Austrian guy just showed up unannounced at my office, speaking very little German, speaking very little English, but refusing to speak German. And basically,
did Russell speak German?
Oh yeah, I think so. And I think in those days people spoke more languages,
Okay, yeah.
But so he goes, basically, Wittgenstein goes, there's a written account of this as well, but it's Wittgenstein basically goes, can you just tell me if I'm stupid? Like if I'm stupid, I'll go back to being an engineer. But if I'm smart, I'll be a philosopher, So anyway, Wittgenstein is now following Bertrand Russell around. There's a written account where Bertrand Russell is like, in the beginning, he was like, this guy was weird. Now he's annoying. He just follows me everywhere. And, not that many people showed up to Russell's lectures because they were super deep on the foundations of mathematics and stuff. And so there were like 4 people plus this new fucking Austrian guy who just shows up. And Wittgenstein came from a very rich family, so he was able to just travel and do all of this stuff, right? And so he goes, yeah, as I said, he goes, can you just tell me if I'm stupid or not? So then Bertrand Russell goes, over the summer, write me something and submit it to me, and I'll tell you if you're stupid, basically. So anyway, he writes this thing, and then it might be an apocryphal story, but the legend goes that he read one sentence and goes, okay, you're not stupid. Now, unfortunately, World War I breaks out, so that puts a wrinkle into everything. But during this time, Wittgenstein starts to write something that he's called the Tractatus. Basically, he was trying to write this. He felt that a lot of philosophy at the time was just basically nonsense. And this actually reflects kind of like what with the milieu of the time, where there was this movement that came later called the Vienna Circle that came out of people like David Hilbert and Albert Einstein, even Bertrand Russell. They weren't actually in the Vienna Circle, but they had inspired these people that then started the Vienna Circle, that basically wanted to shift philosophy onto scientific foundations and said, look, all of this is not, when we're talking about ethics and aesthetics and what is beauty and what is language, it's like, yeah, all of these things are really difficult to define because you guys are just talking in really, really abstract nonsense terms. So let's just make them into scientific questions and solve them. So anyway, Wittgenstein sets out to do this, of basically like, how do we come up with a accurate and precise philosophy of language such that we can kind of cut out, these people are saying things that are nonsense and meaningless, and now we can ignore them. So this is what he tries to do in the Tractatus. And the first premise of the Tractate, or he basically tries to prove 7 propositions. It's a very, I would say, maybe boring book where it's just logic. So there's the first proposition is basically like, the world is just everything that is the case. So he is defining the world as basically the set of all possible facts, right? And then he says like, and so this is called the picture philosophy of language, or the picture vision of language, which is like to say that, look, language is basically gives you a picture of what's out there in reality. It corresponds to what's out there in reality. So if you say something that doesn't correspond to anything in reality, it's meaningless. So the last proposition of the Tractatus is, whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent. Meaning like, if what you're saying doesn't have some picture in reality, then what you're saying is meaningless and we can simply ignore you. So there was this, as I said, there was this push to kind of like carve out a ton of philosophy, basically all ethics, all aesthetics, all questions of religion, just all nonsense, essentially. And so he writes this book called the Tractatus, and it's 75 pages long. It's quite short. And he goes, sorry, it's so short. If you squeezed me like a lemon, nothing would have come out. And he basically goes, this is all that needs to be said about philosophy. I solved all of your problems. Goodbye. And so he just stops philosophizing. He's like, look, philosophy is not practical at all. I'm now going to move on and do other things. So he became an elementary school teacher. It's fucking genius. Which was very like, his family, as I said, was a rich and well-known family. So they were all super embarrassed of like, you can't just go and teach elementary school. In the meantime, while he was trying to become an elementary school teacher, he became a gardener, and which is ridiculous. This guy has tons, he doesn't need to be a gardener, and was living like a very, very kind of stoic life where he like only ate bread and butter and maybe a bit of cocoa, and lived a very stripped bare life. And just kind of rejected all of this money. So anyway, he writes this book called the Tractatus. It gets published after the First World War. And it starts making moves. People start paying attention. Where is this guy? I don't know. He's in rural freaking Austria teaching elementary school. And so even though he's had this amazingly influential impact on philosophy, he only actually wrote 2 books in his lifetime. One was this 75-page thing, and the other was a dictionary. It was a dictionary of like grammar and spelling and pronunciation for children.
Did you write the Tractatus in German?
In German,
okay.
yeah. So, and I think it's hilarious that this guy that's like, was so precise with language where it's like, if it doesn't say anything factual, then you can ignore it. Just ends up writing a dictionary, which is awesome. And makes a lot of sense. So in the meantime, people are trying to find this freaking guy and being like, come back to Cambridge. What are you doing teaching elementary school? You're a genius. You should be philosophizing and should come and teach at Cambridge. And so eventually he attends these conferences in Vienna and finds that, there's actually some interesting stuff being done here, and is impressed and decides, okay, fine, I'll come back to Cambridge.
Those poor school kids. Yes.
I know, like I can't imagine being one of those kids being taught by Wittgenstein. It must have been hilarious. So he comes back to Cambridge and they try and offer him a faculty position, but he doesn't have a PhD. So then they're like, just submit the Tractatus as your thesis. And so anyway, G.E. Moore, who's also one of the great philosophers of the 20th century, and Russell at Cambridge are his thesis examiners. And he goes, he basically says, don't worry guys, I know you won't understand it. Yes! he's so pompous. So anyway, G.E. Moore is said to have read it and went, wow, this is way beyond what we would have expected of a PhD thesis. And so they awarded him his PhD, and he started teaching at Cambridge. And he did so for many years, and there's no books of that out of that time. There was one book that was published posthumously called the Philosophical Investigations. And so, as I mentioned in the beginning, he had this kind of very like analytical, strict view of language. That there's this picture view of language, where it's like, okay, language is there to kind of correspond to facts. It's there to give you an accurate picture of reality. And he goes, yeah, sorry about that. Oh, by the way, in the meantime, there's all this flurry of activity while he's doing all this stuff, like teaching, English or teaching German or whatever in rural Vienna or in rural Austria. There's all this activity going on around these kinds of ideas. And so this one school of philosophy pops up out of the Vienna Circle called logical positivism. And logical positivism basically says, look, a proposition or a sentence is meaningless unless you can verify it through experience or experiment, or it's a statement of logic. So unless it's a statement of logic, or it can be falsified through experiment, it's meaningless, right? So again, all this is trying to do is just cut out whole swathes of philosophy by being like, look, you can't really say anything verifiable about God, so therefore anything you say about God is just like totally meaningless and we can just ignore that. It's not real philosophy. So anyway, all that stuff happens. Wittgenstein comes back later and goes, oh, well, I might have been wrong about that essentially. And has this new theory of language that we call the picture theory of meaning. The tool theory of meaning. He said, look, when we use language, we're using it as a tool, right? And so the meaning of a word is just how it's used in what he calls a certain language game. So, in various different contexts, words will mean different things. So one example he gives is like the water. So the word water can be used in many different ways. If you're in the desert and you're looking for water, you can exclaim, water! There's water there. That means something different to when somebody says, what's the common name for H2O? And the answer is water. Or when you go up to somebody and who's just entered your house and you want to be hospitable and you say, water? As a question. So all of these things, it's the same word, but they have a totally different function and totally different meaning in different contexts. So he says, when philosophers philosophize about language, essentially what they're doing is they say it's language gone. He says it's language gone on vacation. You've essentially taken the word and you've divorced it from where the actual context in which it's used. And he says, look, language is actually a form of life. It's part of our way of life. And he's famous for saying that if a lion could speak, I wouldn't understand what he would say, because his way of engaging with the world is so different from my way of engaging with the world, that if he was to say something, it would have no meaning to me, because we have different ways of life. And so this to me seems like so much better of a way of like engaging with. So, the meaning of a word is the way that it's used in a particular language game. The meaning of a sentence, it's not just for words, but the meaning of a sentence is like the way it's used in a particular language game. And it's kind of disingenuous to try and break something down. Another example he gives is he goes like, let's just try and break down the word game itself. What does game mean? So that maybe the first thing you think of is chess. Okay, so game is something that's done on a board. What about solitaire? Okay, a game is something that's done on a board or with cards. What about tennis? Okay, a game is something that's done on a board or with cards or on a field. On a field? Well, you could also be working on the field. So working on a field is not a game. So what makes tennis being played on a field a game and not work? Okay, well, maybe it's only being done for recreation. Or well, what about people that play chess professionally? So it's like, every time you try and come up with a consistent definition of a word, essentially what he's showing is you can always come up with counterexamples. But what's more important than that is that when you use the word game, you know how to use it, even if you don't know how to kind of concisely and precisely define what it means. So I know that there's this thing going around right now where it's like, oh, you're a feminist. Tell me what a woman is. What's the definition of a woman? And, it's supposed to be like, if you don't know what it means, don't use the word. And I actually don't think that's right. I think that we use words all the time where it's very, very difficult to give a precise meaning. And Wittgenstein's point here is like, it doesn't matter, because the way that language evolves is that it evolves organically out of our ways of life, right? So when you need water, you figure out a way of basically signaling to other members of your species that you need water. You're not going to you don't need a precise definition of what that means. You're just trying to get a certain effect in the world. And so again, language then becomes a tool. And the meaning of a certain thing shouldn't be divorced from the context. Now, let's talk about entropy. Unless you want to go into any of what I've just said there about Wittgenstein, who's a fascinating character. Yeah. Okay, so there's this word entropy. It's just a word, and it has a precise physical definition to it. But then, as it goes out into the world, it gets transduced into the general populace, who maybe don't have a background in physics, right? So then it begins to get divorced from its physical meaning, and it begins to, let's say, mean randomness and chaos. Let's just say. And so if you were to look up the word in Wikipedia, or if you were just to Google the word and a definition comes up, right? That definition reflects how it's kind of commonly used. In fact, if you look at I think it's the American Heritage Dictionary, the way that they actually come up with, because when you look in a dictionary, it'll tell you how it's used. It's like, who decided that, right? Somebody decided that. And the answer to that is that they have these things that are called usage committees that basically go, okay, these are the way that words are used. Those people, first of all, you have no idea who they are. You probably didn't even know they existed. But they're making decisions on your behalf of how your language is being used. And so they're basically trying to reflect how this is being used in common parlance. So anyway, let's say that we have the word entropy. Now, as I said, physically there is a meaning to this. And then it gets transduced and used in different ways in order to, let's say, symbolize randomness. So there's a certain language game that's being played with respect to the word entropy. And so when Peck used it in his book, he was using it in that way. He was using it not in a strict physical sense, but he was using it in the basically popular view of the word, which is that it just means increasing in entropy or increasing randomness. And so, when things fall into total disarray, this is termed entropy, right? The problem is that he then tried to use it in a physical context, right? So he took the word entropy in a certain language game that is divorced from physics. And then he goes, okay, now using this imprecise definition of entropy, what can I say about the second law? What comes about as a consequence of the second law of thermodynamics? And the reason that those two things don't go together is because he used the word in one language game and then tried to kind of import it into a different language game, the language game of physics, right? And it just doesn't follow. Like, if you're going to use the word in a popular way, it means that you don't get to, it means that you can't say anything precise about the physical consequences, right? Because he wasn't using it in a strict physical sense. Does that make sense? Like, he was basically using it in the wrong context, is what I'm saying. And so what that means is that, for me, what that means is like, the kind of the popular definition, unfortunately, is a little bit impoverished, right? It says something that's way less exciting than what the actual definition of entropy says, so that you can't do as much work with it, right? And so, at that point, that's why I was like, okay, I have to stop here and kind of like explain what entropy really means. Because to me, it's kind of sad, right? Because like, when you use it in a popular way, it loses all of its power. It retains some of the power in the sense of saying like, okay, it's about randomness and things becoming more disordered, which is easy to explain to other people. It's like we were talking about before the podcast. It's kind of easy to explain what Bitcoin is. But we only have this Bitcoin thing because all of this wonderful mathematics was done behind the scenes that relatively few people understand. So, does that make... I don't want to hijack the podcast.
No, not at all, man. When I don't have anything useful to say, I just don't say it. But that's... Yeah. So summary of that is that we make language more broad for like daily ease of use, but in certain situations you want to be specific with the use of the language.
Yeah, and it doesn't mean...
And the risk of being loose with the use of it, but then trying to use that specifically. Yeah, it's like, but just in general,
because I don't want to, I'm not trying to say that it's like better, like that other definitions are better. All I mean is that these things evolve organically in different contexts, and actually, even though it's the same word, it has totally different meaning, and therefore different consequences run from using that word. So when you try and use the word from one language game in a new language game, they're just totally incommensurate. They don't really belong. It only superficially appears that they're the same word,
Yeah.
but they have totally different meanings. So therefore, you can do less work with it.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So we should be careful in some senses. At the moment, it seems like when it crosses over with science, then you need to be more careful with the definition.
But on the flip side, it's like if you were to use the physical strict definition in the wrong context, it would also come off the wrong way. So I don't think it's two-way street here, where in both contexts, I think you want to use the right word for the right context in the right language game. Yeah. I find that I really love doing this, like coming back to like learning languages and get exposed to new cultures in my work, because it's very multidisciplinary. I really like the challenge involved in, okay, now I'm speaking to a clinical audience. So I'm going to engage with the content in a totally different, maybe less physical, less mathematical way, and speak more about the way that they view the world. So what I want to get at here is that like it's analogous to what we were talking about before with like learning different languages. Is like you kind of have it opens up new vistas of seeing the world. For me, even with English, when I'm speaking to a physicist, the world is different than when I'm speaking to a chemist, and when I'm speaking to a mathematician, when I'm speaking to a statistician, when I'm speaking to a doctor. They all engage in totally different language games. And I find it so exciting to go into like this new domain of talking to somebody that plays a totally different language game, and then being like, okay, we use the same words, right? But we use them for totally different purposes. So let me understand your purpose. And it almost is like speaking a different language.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah. What I would say, man, is like, for me, so Feynman talks about this actually. He said, because the great physicist, Nobel Prize winning physicist, Richard Feynman, was also a Renaissance person, and he ended up getting pretty good at drawing and like visual art. And one day he was learning how to get better at painting and drawing from a friend of his. And the artist says to Feynman, see, when I see this flower, I see it so much more deeply than you, because I engage with it artistically. And Feynman actually said, no, because I can see what's beautiful about that flower, actually, in the same way that you can. But you don't understand how the cells work together. And within those cells, how all the atoms come together to make that cell. And within that atom, how all the quarks come together within each proton and with each neutron. And then within the quarks, I see so much more deeply than you do. And so the reason that I was like, or maybe one of the things that I think is a shame in using an imprecise definition of, let's say, entropy, is that it for me I want to know the real thing, because it's like, not only do I see that there's this, that the universe goes towards, chaos or whatever, like that everybody kind of sees, but I see the statistics of how that happens. I see the physics of how that happens. I see the mathematics that explains that. It's amazing that we can write down equations to explain that, and that actually you can make predictions on the basis of that. And then once you know how to make predictions, you can actually build instruments that take advantage of the universe, and then maybe you could use those instruments to, in my case, improve outcomes in cancer. Like, there is such a depth to things that is available once you can engage with maybe the same context, but with totally different language games. And that, biology, you can be looked at through a chemical lens, and then you see these things at the molecular level. So for me, I don't know, man. I get so excited just thinking about how deep and rich the world is. and how at every level you're playing a different language game. You're using similar words, it's all English. But what does it reflect? It reflects a totally different way of engaging with the universe, right? So, anyway.
Yeah, different depths of understanding, okay? I was always thinking as you were talking, like, depending on your understanding of a subject matter,
right,
that word will mean...
That's right.
Yeah, and to understand to the first extent, you must understand the simplest definition of that word. And then as you learn more about that field, that word, it's almost like it's more precisely defined in your mind because you understand deeper.
Yeah, it's difficult because, like, I understand what you're saying, but like I would almost look at it like the way I said before, where it's like when you come into a new language, one way to quickly progress is that you use hooks from your other language.
Yeah.
So you said like you start off with a definition, then you make it more precise. In my case, I began with the precise definition of entropy first.
Yeah.
There's no reason that you actually have to start off at the highest level of abstraction and come down.
Yeah. Wait, how would you get there though? Going through mathematical formulas.
Yeah.
And this is entropy, and like as the solution sort of to the problem.
And this, so S equals, and then you see what the strict technical mathematical definition of entropy is first.
What is that?
Oh, we can go into that. Would you like me to do that?
Yeah, just quickly.
Okay.
If it's not too time consuming.
I can. It's my favorite concept. So yeah, sure. And I'll play this language game, right? I'll play it at the language, which is this is my favorite thing about teaching is like I have to come into your language game, right? You relax.
Yeah, I can do
right?
that. Yes.
The responsibility for teaching is on me, and it's my responsibility to transduce this complicated and incredibly profound physical quantity into something that's understandable to everybody. If Feynman said if you can't do that, if you can't speak, if you can't explain something to anybody, to the common person, then you don't understand it. You fucked up, not them. Don't blame them for not having a physics degree.
So anyone that's at uni, if you get a bad result, walk up to your lecturer, slap your exam in their face and be like, you fucked up, man.
You fucked up,
brother.
Yeah.
And then put them towards this podcast and they'll understand. Yeah.
You'll get entropy, and it's really beautiful.
Well, I think I've got a low level, lower than obviously the new understanding of it, but yeah. Let's do this, baby.
It won't take long.
I'm gonna relax.
Yes. It won't take long. So I have a glass of water here. And in that glass of water are molecules, right? So if you just think about the water, H2O, buzzing about, and they're moving around, right? We can't see them, but you know them. You know that they're all colliding and moving around. That's why when I move the glass like this, it flows. The water deforms, and all of that is just molecules moving around. Okay, so there are molecules that are zipping around, and if I heat up the glass, then the molecules zip around faster, right? So you've heard of random thermal motion. So what that means is that as you heat up the glass, that motion is faster and faster and faster. And then as I cool down the glass, that motion slows down more and more and more. In fact, what can happen is that you can cool down the glass to 0 degrees, and then there's a phase change, right? So the water goes from being liquid to being solid. And then when it's in the solid state, it becomes crystalline, right? So you can think of it as like these water molecules as being rigidly in a crystal structure. They're really they're jittering a little bit, but they're moving much less than they can when they're liquid. And then the other thing I could do is I could heat the glass all the way up to 100 degrees Celsius. What happens then? It starts to boil. So gas comes up, and then molecules will escape from the surface of the liquid out into the air, and they'll move around. And they have even more ways that they can move than when they are in this glass, right? Okay, so I think you've got a quantitative background. So what I can say is that as the molecules move out of the glass, they have higher degrees of freedom, right? They're just free to do more things. They can move in more ways because they're unencumbered by the fluid itself. Okay, and then as you can imagine, once it becomes an ice crystalline, it has way less degrees of freedom. It can't really move. It can move a tiny little bit in its crystal structure, but can't move much at all relative to if it escaped the glass and went out into the air. Okay, so there are lots of different ways those molecules can move. They can translate, which just means that they move around. They can rotate. They can vibrate. They can stretch and deform. Lots of different ways those molecules can move. Now, the entropy of the system is just how many degrees of freedom are available to those molecules. That's it. Now, as I mentioned, when you cool down the glass, there are way fewer degrees of freedom. There are way less. The molecules are less free. Another way, the precise way of saying that is that each molecule has fewer microstates. It just means how many different ways of being are there for that molecule. That's what we call a microstate. Another way of saying that is how many different ways could those molecules be arranged? The more arrangements are possible, the more microstates. The only reason we don't call it a state is because it's small. Microstate. No problem. Okay, so how many different microstates are there available for the molecule? Let me ask you a question. How many do you think there would be more microstates for the molecule when it escapes the glass and can zip around, or more microstates when I freeze the glass and it can't move at all?
More when it's in a gas.
Beautiful. So the entropy of the system is greater when there's more chaos, when the molecule can escape the glass and go wherever it wants to. Less degrees of freedom or less available microstates when the glass is frozen and is crystalline. Okay. The entropy is simply the probability that we have these. So there are all of these microstates that are available. Okay. Now the probability that we have some extreme microstate out, like that's way further outside the glass, is going to be very, very low if I freeze the glass down, right? So the probability basically says, how many available microstates are there with appreciable probability? The less microstates that can be occupied, or the less possible arrangements can be occupied with appreciable probability, the lower the entropy of the system. In this case, the cooler the glass.
So is the lowest entropy value 1 then?
I think it would be 0. Right?
0 states.
Yeah, like theoretically speaking, you can't do anything, let's say. There's no way that it could move.
Okay. Wouldn't that be 1 though?
Oh, you're saying one state.
Yeah.
Sure, one state.
Okay.
Sure, one state. Let's say the lowest number of microstates is 1. Yes.
Yeah.
It's only because we're taking the log for mathematical reasons.
Okay.
Log of 1 is 0.
Okay, gotcha. Yep. Okay. Oh, so it's a log
probability.
Log probability. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
It doesn't really matter. That's only a mathematical
that's what
efficiency.
I was asking about. Yes.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Sure. So yeah, it's like how many microstates are available with appreciable probability. The lowest number would be 1, and here just for math, like mathematical convenience, we look at the log likelihood, which is 0.
Yeah. Nice. One thing, side note on all this is why school is important and curiosity is important and learning generally a little bit about everything, I think, because like even I'm thankful for my understanding of maths and what I've studied and understanding logs because
right.
I don't know if you can tell me if you agree with this because I'm a little bit rusty, but my way of explaining it would be it's a useful way of making orders of magnitude more like more obvious to your brain.
Okay, yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, right.
So going from 10 to 100 to 1,000 to 10,000, 100,000, if you do that on a linear scale,
right?
You know, and the way the world is,
beautiful, man.
Things are exponential,
right?
So like, it's if you track it linearly, you're just gonna see the extreme, basically.
Gorgeous.
You know? Yeah.
Gorgeous.
Logs help you to see like more clearly, I guess, like maybe rates of change in a way, and yeah. Anyway. I guess so because they're associated with derivatives as well, right? So, yeah. But anyway, all these things it's you can only put those dots together by having a bit of an understanding. Yeah, and now I can see how that would help with
yes
entropy as well.
Right, because things grow exponentially.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? So
Yeah.
as you can imagine, once that molecule comes out into the world and it has all these degrees of freedom, those degrees of freedom grow really quickly.
Yeah.
So out of mathematical convenience, we use
That's
logs.
pretty cool. There you go.
Yeah.
Very nice.
And I thought a log was just a bit of wood.
Yeah.
Yes. So does that make sense, Lockie?
Yeah.
Entropy and how it's not quite just chaos.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's the amount of chaos. Right?
Yeah. It's like although it's not really chaos. It's the like how much freedom. The degrees of freedom. The number of possible arrangements.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't it doesn't just because there is the potential for a bunch of different arrangement doesn't mean that there is.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We're saying how many different microstates are there going to be occupied with appreciable probability, right? So it's possible, although not likely, that you could heat something up and it would go into this like incredibly, what's it called? Like organized pattern.
Yeah.
It's just that's not likely to happen because there are all these other microstates that are available with appreciable probability.
Yeah.
But when you cool things down, in the case of water, when you cool things down, it's so much less likely that energy will have enough, that molecule will have enough energy to occupy some higher state.
Yeah.
That it's much more likely to be crystalline and well arranged and well ordered. Yeah. Which to us, we then classify in our monkey brains as being less chaotic, less disordered, more ordered.
Yeah.
So, so the wonderful thing about that is like, it not only does it give you like a new way of seeing things, it actually gives you a formula. So you can go out and calculate things. And then, as I said, because you can do maths on these things, you can then make predictions. And once you can make predictions, you can build tools. And once you have tools, you can like go out and get whatever you'd like. So it's very empowering to engage with the world in these different ways. Another way that, another language that I really like is, let's say, Python, which is a programming language, which is again a different way of kind of like engaging with the world. But again, what does it allow you? Okay, it allows you to look at logic in a different way, but it also allows you to build stuff, right? So,
also, I don't know if everyone agree with me on this, but I feel like programming languages are much simpler to learn than a different spoken language. Would you say?
Thinking back, actually, yes.
Yeah, they seem to just have less content to learn, I think.
Yeah, they often simply reflect logic.
Yeah.
They reflect very basic intuitions.
Yeah.
And again, it's like once you learn one, it's way easier to learn a ton.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Another side tangent, because this is somewhat elongated.
Yes.
You know how is it said that entropy is typically increasing within a system? Is that what it is?
Yeah. The net entropy increases over the system.
Yeah. But for the entire universe, it's decreasing, right?
No, it's still increasing.
Because you know how like isn't it not expected that eventually everything will just freeze and energy will, because it's expanded so much.
I see what you're saying.
The temperature will just decline. Hence, would that not be a less?
That's a good question, actually. Yeah. It's often like as Peck says, it's like often the picture that we get is that everything becomes an amorphous blob, which therefore has the highest entropy. But yeah, that's a good point. That as things kind of expand and get colder and get further away, it's much more intuitively. It seems much more likely that everything would kind of just freeze and stop.
Yeah.
All right.
I think so.
Yeah. And
as stars die and all that kind of stuff,
Right.
Yeah. That's why I think we should be thankful for global warming. Yes. At a deep level.
That's funny.
Protect the planet, but also cool the world. Yes. It's a temporary problem,
Oh, gorgeous, man. Sweet. Yeah, I don't think I have. That was really interesting discussion. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, it's cool, man. There's so many things we hit on that too many things. I would like to like delve into more.
Okay.
With curiosity, not even like in the podcast, just
okay.
Of my own study obviously there's a lot of languages would be interesting to learn more about. And then even like just talking about logs and things like that, I'd be fun to derive from first principles the first formulas, because I've done some of that in actuarial, and then in high school I'm sure it was more like, here's how you use a log. I guess you're not quite ready to derive it perhaps at that point. So,
right.
But now that I use it in other aspects too, yeah, exciting array of things to consider and think about, maybe dive into.
Gorgeous, man. Well, I think that's a good place to stop. What do you think?
I think let's go some of this.
Right, and merci aussi.
Yeah. Is there anything in French? So, let's go to some of this. It means like thanks for your hard work. Okay. But it's another one of those phrases we're talking about that doesn't have a direct translation. It's just in Japanese. It basically means it's like a very respectful way of acknowledging, I guess, time you spent with someone, or a thing you've done together. And it's like a very just a really respectful way of kind of like saying thank you. It's definitely not thank you, but thank you for your hard work. Right. So it's cool because only when you live in Japan and people say it to you and you say it to people, do you feel what it means. And you can't really have a textbook definition, you know?
Right.
Yeah. Is there anything like that in French you can think of?
I was just thinking, I'm sure there are, but I can't think of any. And I think the reason for that is because actually English and French are very related.
Yeah.
So, as I said, like any word ending in ION, you already know how to say it. You got it.
The first thing I thought of was la papillon.
La papillon? Yeah.
But it's the other way around, so it doesn't really work.
That's a butterfly.
Yeah.
That's a butterfly.
Yeah. Butterfilion.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, one of the interesting things about French is like just how many letters you have to write down that are just not pronounced.
Yeah.
It's so weird.
Yeah, true.
And even speaking to French people about it, they're like, yeah, it fucking sucks. Like the grammar is so difficult and there are all these accents. And I remember
we didn't even speak about male and female words, but you know,
there's male and female. Yeah, there isn't just formal and informal. There's male and female. And then you might think, okay, well, what makes that female? Like the word for vagina is masculine. So then it's like, okay, if anything was going to be feminine. So it has nothing to do with whether or not the word is actually feminine in any way.
Yeah.
And I don't know, it just has some weird historic, reason that it's pronounced that way. Or sometimes it has to do with the way that the word sounds.
Yeah.
But all of that's just arbitrary, So that's difficult. At least, in German, there's masculine, feminine, and neutral.
Oh,
there's a third one, brother.
Come on, guys.
Der, die, das. Come on, mates.
Yeah. No, that's exciting. Exciting.
Yes.
More frontiers, baby. Yeah.
Yeah, good point. Cool. I guess then to wrap up, thank you as always for your time and attention. And until next time, keep on learning.
Yes.